going to do our next session now, which is going to be leading on from what we did before lunch. So before we learn where we get feedback from and where what the types of feedback are, and then we did a little a task where we did some observations. Okay, and now we're going to look into it a bit further about how to give it. So the learning outcomes for our session this afternoon. So we want to know the best ways to give feedback. So I'm going to give you some tips on how you can improve your feedback skills. Learn which types of feedback are beneficial to different kinds of people depending on their personalities, and being able to give the feedback in a situation here so you can practice that and be prepared for when you do it in your workspace. Okay, so before I ask if anyone's been in a situation where they've been given feedback, now I want to turn it on its head and have any of you given someone feedback on their performance before? Just show of hands. Okay, so we've got a few. Who wants to give me an example? I'll get 2 examples.
I have a really bad operations coordinator that works for me.
Yep.
And I had to performance manage him before giving some really bad feedback.
And how did that go?
Yeah, you didn't like it.
No?
No.
See, that's it. So sometimes feedback is not taken very well by the person you're giving it to. Okay? So again, that depends on how you give it. Anyone else?
I have a team of interns working for me that I have to give regular feedback for, and I had to give feedback to one of them today based on feedback I've given before that was not implemented.
Okay. And how did that go? Yeah, if it was a second time.
We'll find out.
Yeah.
It's writing-based feedback, so he has to write his next thing, and we'll see.
Okay, so that's a bit of a longer process rather than face-to-face. That's fair enough. So we've got a few experience there, and a few that aren't, okay, but you may come up with this in your job role in the future, so it's good to know. So the assessment, I'll just give you a heads up on the assessment for this session. We're going to be using all those notes that you took in the previous session, okay, and you're going to be sitting in your groups facing each other, and you're going to give feedback to the group as a whole and then to the individuals that I paired you up with through the session. Okay, so just be aware of that as we go through these sessions. Think about the tools I'm giving you and how you can implement them into the feedback you're going to give later on. Okay, so we're going to start with some tips on feedback. I've come up with, I'll put together 10 tips for feedback from some sources that I've come through, and I'm going to give them to you now so you can take these on board and use these yourself. So, building a trusting relationship. When you're giving feedback to someone, you want to know that, or they want to know that you've got their best interests at heart. Okay? So if it's your employee, your friend, your manager, by having a relationship, they're going to be more open and understanding in terms of that you're doing it for the right reasons, okay? And they're more likely to be receptive to what you're saying and take it on board. Does that all make sense? Okay? So, building a relationship with the person. So, it's not just a stranger, it's someone you know, you have a vested interest in as well. Asking permission, okay? So, with feedback, you don't want to force it on people. Generally, if you try and force it on them, they're not going to be very open and receptive to it. Okay, so you want to make sure that they're open and ready for your feedback. So asking simple questions like, can I just go over some of my observations with you? Okay, that is their opportunity to go no, and then you know it's not the right time. Okay, or they'll say, yeah, sure, and then they'll open that lines of communication. Okay, so they're going to be more open to talking about what you've seen. Picking the right place. Okay, so giving feedback. Do you think it should be done in the middle of a meeting? Would you pick someone out in the meeting and give them feedback in front of everyone else? No? Okay, so that's probably not very appropriate. Okay, so it's finding the right place and the right time to give them that feedback. Okay, so it should be given in a quiet, calm environment where other people won't overhear. Generally, if you're giving feedback, especially if it's more on the negative constructive side, people are going to be maybe embarrassed, okay, and they won't want other people to know that you've got these shortcomings. So by having it in a nice, quiet and isolated place, it gives them the opportunity to speak more openly without fear of their peers being involved with it. Okay, so you want to make sure that they're in a comfortable situation themselves. Making sure your intent is clear. So, why you are doing it, why you are giving them the feedback. You've got to make it clear that you're doing it for their benefit. You're not just saying this to make them feel bad or to pump them up. You're doing this because there's a reason behind it. Okay? You've noticed these things, you think these improvements need to be made, or this is what you've done well, and that is why you're telling them. Okay? Make it clear why you are doing it, and then they can understand. Be specific. Okay? So, if you're going to give feedback to someone, rather than being vague and saying, when you talk to people, you seem to be quite rude. You could be, I noticed when you were talking to Mrs. Jeffries earlier that you're quite short with her. What is the reason for this? Okay, so then you'll just put in a name, a time to it, so they can recall it. If you're quite vague and just talk about in general, they're not going to know what you're talking about and what you've observed. Whereas if you make it specific to examples, they can then relate to that and look back and say, okay, fair enough, I can see where you're coming from, and this is what I need to do. Make sure it's constructive. Going back to our last session, constructive feedback is the best, okay? So by giving people instructions on how to improve, you're going to get the best out of that feedback. Okay? You're not just giving them yes or no, you're giving them why. Okay? So whether it's positive or negative, make it constructive in order to improve their performance. Okay? Give them solutions to their problems, or give them encouragement in the areas they need. Avoid negative language. Okay? So if you're using negative language in your speech, it's going to immediately put people on the defensive. Okay? They're going to be quite closed off. If you're being negative towards them, they're likely to push that back on you, and they're not going to be willing to take on board what you're saying. So, on the flip side of that, we want to make sure that we're using positive language. So, this is more likely to leave them open to what you're saying, and make it clear that you are doing it to help them improve. Okay? So, even if it's negative feedback, you want to put a positive spin on it. Okay? So whether it's one situation went bad but everything else has been good, it could be something like, we've noticed that you've been performing really well recently, okay? So the last couple of days you've been doing everything we've asked of you, but we just noticed this morning this happened, okay? That way you've already opened them up by giving them something positive before you go into the critique, which you can then help them with. Listen. So, giving feedback is a two-way street. It's not just about you telling them what they've done wrong, what they've done right, and what they need to do. It's you then asking why it may have happened or what they can do. By getting them involved in what you're saying and what the information you're relaying, it's going to have a positive impact, okay? Because they are then becoming part of the solution as well, so they can help with what's happening. And be timely. So, feedback is best given as soon as possible after the situation. If you notice something happened and then you wait 2 weeks before bringing it up, they're not going to recall that as well, as if it's happened in that morning. Okay? While it's fresh in the memory, it's best to address that situation. Okay? The only time you would possibly hold off is where emotions have been heightened. Okay? So say a situation, you've had an issue with a staff member, and you've talked to them, and then you see it half an hour later, you see them do it again. Sometimes that can make you quite frustrated, angry, and if you were then to give them feedback straight away in that mood, you'd be very it will come across potentially offensive, okay? And that's when they're going to close off and not listen to you, okay? And that's when the emotions take over. You need to draw yourself back and make sure that you've got a clear head. You're just going through the facts rather than the emotions. That makes sense to everyone? Alright, so that is 10 tips for doing it, okay? For ways to help you give feedback to someone, okay? So we're just going to do a little demonstration. So I need a volunteer. Who would like to volunteer for me? Hi, if you want to come up to the front, Sarah. Stand over there. Okay, so we're just going to role play through an experience where I'm going to give you feedback, okay, and just some of the ways it could go. All right. So the scenario is your name's Grace, you're a receptionist, okay, and earlier on today you answered a phone call and someone asked you a question, and your response to it was, "Sorry, I don't know." Okay, and that's where you left it. All right. So we're just now going to come into this conversation. I'm your boss, approaching you after that. So. Hey Grace, how you doing?
Good, how are you?
Yeah, very well, thank you. Do you mind if I have a quick chat with you just about something that I noticed earlier?
Sure.
Yeah, cool. If you just want to come over and we'll just take a seat.
Okay.
So, you don't have to. So we're in a nice isolated area here. It's just us chatting. All right. So, noticed you've been doing really well recently. Okay, the customers are loving you coming through. How are you finding everything?
Yeah, it's good.
Yeah.
Customers are nice.
Perfect. One thing I did pick up on earlier though, I overheard you speaking to a customer that phoned up, and I believe that you weren't sure about a question they asked you. Do you recall what I'm talking about?
Yeah, I didn't know.
Okay, that's fine. So, in that experience, have you been asked something before that you haven't known? And what have you done about it, sort of thing?
I just said I didn't know.
Yeah.
What should I do if I don't know?
So that's fair enough. If you don't know something, I'd rather you be honest and not try and lie to the customer. But then we need to look at something that we can take forward to get that customer the information they wanted to know. Okay. So in this situation, what you could have done is potentially said, "I'm afraid I'm not aware of this information, but what I can do is take your information, your details, and get back to you." Or you could have transferred them onto a member of the staff that didn't know. Okay, does that make sense? Perfect. So something like that would really improve and just help you and help the customers get what they want. So something like that. We opened it up. We had a discussion. I talked. I listened. Okay, and then we didn't blame. We just said suggestions for improvements in the future. Does that make sense to everyone? Yeah. Perfect. Thank you for helping. Okay, so I'm just going to show you another example from a clip quickly. This is the feedback you can give to me. Make sure technology is working. I can assure you this was working this earlier.
Can we just copy and paste the...
What's that?
Do you have to exit the slideshow first?
No, it's fine. I'll just catch up with you after.
Just call me. Bye.
Hi, can you call Katie, please? And just make sure that no one disturbs us, okay? Thank you.
Yeah, Julie, you wanted to see me?
Oh, hi, Kate. Nice to see you. project that you handed in today was splendid. It was really good. Thank you so much for following the feedback that I've given you last week about the formatting. It was perfect.
Thank you so much. I really took that feedback to heart, and I tried to put it as best as possible in my report this week.
That's great. Kate, I did notice that this morning you were here at 8:45 instead of 8:30. Can you tell me a little more about that?
Yeah, I know. I'm so sorry. I meant to tell you. I set my alarm. I didn't hear it. I know I did that last week too.
Here's the thing. When you come here a little bit late, the whole office is affected, and our day starts out a little bit late, and as a result, we do have to stay in a little behind.
Wow. I didn't know I affected that many people.
Yeah. So do you think you can commit to being here on 8:30?
Yeah, I can set my alarm louder. I can even get a coworker to come in or to call me in the morning to make sure I'm up.
That's a good plan, like as a contingency plan, so that you wake up. That's awesome.
Well, thank you so much for the feedback.
All right, so we'll meet again next week, and we'll discuss how things are going.
Perfect, thank you.
Okay, so how did everyone find that?
What I want to talk to you about today is what do we do with employees? Give them feedback in a way.
Okay.
I felt like she was really keen to not wake up late again.
So yeah, it was clearly a very natural environment. Okay, that was definitely what was happening at the time. So you may have missed at the start. So a colleague come in, was asking if they wanted to go lunch, and when he said he's got just to meet with someone, she asked, "Can I sit in?" So he said no. So he wanted that to be a private meeting. He didn't want anyone overhearing. Okay. Then he obviously called his colleague in, and they went through. First off, he gave her some praise, okay, about how well she was doing recently. So she was quite open and friendly and ready for a chat. Then he come in with what the issue was, so she was being late. As I'm sure you've all experienced before, lateness is evident in all workplaces, okay? And it does have an impact. So that's what he carried on with, is the impact it had on everyone, okay, to help her realise. He also got her involved in the conversation, so finding out why it happened, okay, so he can understand the reasons behind it, and then getting her to suggest solutions to improve. Okay, so with feedback, it's not always about you're telling them what to do to get better, but it can be about making them realise what they need to do. Okay, and then they can come back to that and tell you also. Does that all make sense? Okay. So there's a few different types of people. This is not going to encompass everyone, but this will encompass most people. Okay, just generally the types of people that you'll find in a workplace and just in general in life. You may fit into one of these categories, or you may immediately, as I speak about them, realise someone in your workspace that does. Okay, so starting off with playfuls. So these are the people that love to network. Okay, love to talk, love to get to know everyone. Okay, want to be that person that everyone knows, everyone will go to speak to. Okay, they're the kind of people that love positive feedback. Love to know when you're happy with them. Okay. And they like to know ongoing. So on a daily or every time you see them, just saying, "Hey, great job, you're doing really well, keep it up," sort of thing. They love that positive reflection. Okay, that's the way they like to have it, short and snappy and continuous as you go along. After that, you've got powerfuls. Okay, so these are the people that are driven and decision makers. They set their goals and they want to achieve it. Has everyone met this kind of person? Okay, they're very goal orientated. They know what they want to get out of things, and they will work towards that no matter what. Okay, so they like their feedback slightly differently. So they clear-cut, relatable feedback. Okay, so with regards to what they're aiming to achieve, if they've been set a project, they want to know about that project, how it's being affected, and what they can do to improve it. Okay. They're not looking at small outside things, they're more focused. precisers. So these are the perfectionists of the workplace. Very organised structure. Their desk will be immaculate. Their workspace will be immaculate. They'll be able to find anything within like seconds because they know where everything is. So they're quite organised and structured. So they prefer to have structured performance meetings. So rather than with the playfuls where they like ongoing comments on their performance, these are the kind of people that will prefer a monthly sit-down meeting where you will go in together, you'll have all the information ready to pass over to them. Okay, so they don't want every time something happens, they want to have it all together and ready for them to take on. But then from that, they need time to process it. So they wouldn't like to potentially discuss it straight at that meeting. They'd like to take that away, realise what you're saying, okay, and then come back with a solution. And finally, you've got the peacefuls. So these are the easygoing people that don't want to cause any trouble, will stay out of confrontation, and will just keep their heads down also. Yeah? So they're the most receptive to feedback because they don't want to cause trouble. So they're quite open. Oh, what's happening? If it's bad feedback, oh, sorry, like this, like I'll try and help. Because they don't want to have confrontation. They don't want to have an argument. So they're very receptive to open comments, but they're not great at giving it. So if it was on the flip side, they wouldn't be great at giving it because they wouldn't want to offend anyone or have issues like that. So now on to the assessment task. I've given you 10 tips on how to give feedback. We know the types of people, okay? It's going to be hard to distinguish that in this assessment because you don't know each other that well. Taking that in the future. You also know the benefits of the types of feedback that we covered in the last session. So what I'd like you to do is get into your two groups, okay? You get 10 minutes to discuss and prepare your feedback to be given to each other, okay? So this will consist of writing notes on top of what you've got, ready to read out, okay? And like I said, the first section will be group on group. One group will tell the other, vice versa, and then in front of everyone, but it will be individual feedback. Does that all make sense?
Yep.
Okay, perfect. So if you want to get into your two teams, I believe it's just one or two moving. So I would separate, have some space between the two teams so you don't hear each other's ideas and everything. Okay, and you've got 10 minutes starting from now. Please use myself and Ella if you need any assistance.
Yeah. Can I have a map or something? Plus a hard writing.
But everyone
Ask them if they enjoy it. Get them to smile. To divide the group, say to them, who do you think is the leader? They throw their feet towards the end, and then they have maybe do like a big arrow where we actually put our bits in, so this is where we put our feedback, test the feedback. This is like, so you can just know the difference between our bits and their bits. I thought they were very cohesive. There was never, they didn't stumble, they were smooth. No one's doing the guitar score.
Yeah.
It's good about it, it's a lot. It's more about how they work, not about the sound. Cohesive, smooth transition.
Yeah.
Hearing low.
I use the word conducive and I'm getting back to the
What does contribute mean?
Give in, like give things to the group, add in.
There you go.
Oh, like.
Sounds like you've got a really good student here with you. How did you find the group class making sandwiches? Good. Tasting.
Yeah. I think the first one a little bit more according to plan. So pretty. Yeah. From start to finish, we didn't really come across any roadblocks. It's quite positive, like with positive praise. Yeah. I feel like I get my something about
Yeah,
just maybe it's just not what we
So you come out with, obviously what you talk to the negative, do you come out with things constructive, not just...
Yeah.
So in a way
Start
like,
and then these at the end.
Yeah,
Okay.
okay.
And then feedback,
yeah, which is
feedback
positive.
to start and end. And then
Improve your
this one is going to link to planning, and that's what could be more.
Yeah.
Could be that one. It's maybe
Okay.
an example of that. So in the future, instead of just one person telling, everyone trying to fix each other what you're going to do, and then everyone can have a role rather than just like one person doing it and everyone else doing that. And then bring it back into our, but even though, and maybe have someone like,
In terms of verbal
they did that proper,
communication,
in terms of the time management, like maybe have
because
somebody
in
like
terms
watching
of
them.
your sound, so the verb
regular checking.
Yeah.
Regular checking.
Yeah, and checking with how the other people are doing.
Yeah.
Because people putting out the same list didn't know how the facility decided how to do it. Designing the roles. Yeah, you know the roles.
And how many times is it
And you didn't know how to separate they needed. Yeah.
and then
like
probably a bit at the bottom would be however, in terms of the physical making of the sandwich, everyone was
Was okay, but it wasn't far enough. That's the thing.
7 out of 8 sandwiches were identical.
You know this bit.
About halfway through. Have you thought about how they can give you individual feedback yet?
Yeah, I'd put it in to make it a positive spin on it. So although this was the case, I can't spell very well.
You tell them.
It worked well.
Maybe slightly slower. Maybe it plays to people's strengths in the team and things like that, because if some people aren't creative, it's going to be slower for most great.
Did you get any marks?
Well, I just realized that I'd said 5 out of 5 for how much work was done and the sandwich was finished in session. But I think what's a positive of all of us. Because my kids get my positive feedback.
Really needed to know.
Are there any other words in this one?
More
Maybe
figure
like
out.
this.
What have we got on our sheets? Like, in terms
Maybe
of
keyword ESL attribute will be a
some attribute would definitely get some.
It's true with the numbers. It's high on if you work.
Okay.
I've seen these numbers before.
So,
We're going for the strongest
Okay.
best font, and in the week the weakest or worst.
oh, she's confusion with the same.
How what's come on?
So, obviously,
In terms of once it's one that means they're very different. So that could have been
You got them right?
Yes. Just to be very correct, so you got that was very good, got the ball rolling. But then we didn't update the others as regulated institution about where she was up to.
yeah, I can how you more than relatively.
By you more regularly.
Not the way I
So
feel
that
right.
they don't end up with that
I'm good.
situation
I
that they had
remember
where she
like
was
3
always
teachers
on
and
the slices. They need to get some feedback that both sides should communicate a bit more often about where they're up to in terms of how they
yeah.
have that to do.
Yeah, it was jump straight into it.
Got just over a minute left. We've sorted out the individual feedback.
I was just thinking about it.
What are you going to say?
The schools are 7 or 5. So
Yeah, I got my first one out. The first 10 went to activists.
Remember, we're using the same sort of techniques in group one and in the individual one. We want to make sure we're praising them for what they've done well and helping them improve on what they may be.
My own as well.
is it in front of everyone today?
So we're going to see this side by
about
side.
the one that
Is it all at once or is it like you work into it?
we just get rid of the square and put one million in capital.
Okay, last 30 seconds. Try and start wrapping it up.
You're responsible for your feedback.
Yeah, so.
Oh my god, I'm actually on this shocking.
Is that some feedback on?
That's a really good feedback on it.
Okay, so that's been 10 minutes. How did you all find that?
Useful.
Yeah?
Yeah.
That's it. Bounce off ideas from each other. Yeah. Just, that's it. Sometimes it's good taking a step back and just evaluating how you're going to approach the situation rather than going straight into it. Okay? So, start off, we are going to have group 2, we'll call you, feedbacking on group 1 sandwich makers. Okay? So, it's down to you guys. Off you go.
One go for it, please.
Okay. So, how did you guys think of this one? How did you as a group think that the whole thing was? Very good?
Yeah, I thought the sandwiches looked pretty good.
Okay, cool. So, hold on. Just trying to read my handwriting. Okay, so you thought it went well. That's good. So, we thought, I'm glad you guys thought you did a really good job. We also thought that you guys had really great teamwork. You just worked really well together. You were really cohesive. It kind of, all of your strengths and weaknesses seemed to kind of work with each other. You all seem to have a role in the group as well. Everyone kind of seemed to kind of cohesively just kind of find that thing that they were good at within the group, and therefore it obviously made your group come together really well. In saying that, we did notice, despite the fact that your group worked really well together, there were some weaknesses and strengths within the group. So if you're happy for me to tell you about that, you're okay with that?
Absolutely.
Okay. So the only real thing that we saw was that verbally, some people were really just more active than other people. Not saying that that is a negative thing, we just noticed that within the group, some people verbally contributed more to others.
Just going to step in there. Remember, guys, that I'm assessing you all on your feedback, not just on one person.
Okay, so guys
So-
want to jump in with me? Would be great. Okay, so
So if
so
someone else wants to
when
go.
we're giving feedback now, sorry, I just want to stop. Giving feedback now, do we need to do individual feedback or is it just as the group?
We're going to finish the group one first, but I
Yeah.
want you all to have your chance to give the feedback. So thanks for your part.
Okay, cool. Someone else. And then I'm up to here.
In terms of, oh, do you know that?
No.
In terms of everything, obviously we said you had strengths and whatnot, we sort of glazed over it a little bit. What would you say your main strength as a group was?
I think we planned pretty quickly and knew what everybody was doing, and then we just got on with the job and made sure everything was there at the end so we could construct the sandwich.
I totally agree that everyone massively just got on and it all seemed to fall into place quite naturally. There wasn't really, it was very smooth in the transitions between everything happening. With regards to the planning though, what we observed a little bit was that the planning was very short. So for example, 7 of your sandwiches were identical, however 2 were not. Possibly that could have been a slight lack of planning. Oh sorry, 1, yeah, I can't add up to 8 for some reason. And numbers. But in terms of that, maybe a little bit more slight bit more thought into, alright, these need to be this size, because obviously there is a time pressure on it and that makes people go a bit quicker. What else?
Yeah, so you all came together, worked really well, everyone knew their jobs, and the end result was fantastic. The sandwiches looked really good. They did look identical, bar the one, I think. But again, that came down to the planning. But aside from that, I think, yeah, perfect sandwiches.
What was that bit then?
Okay.
In summary, you guys coordinated the group really well. Everyone was kept on task pretty well. There was lots of positive reinforcement, lots of confidence within the group. It was an overall pretty good effort.
Could I ask a question? If you were to do it again, would you change anything? If so, what?
We would cut 18 slices instead of 16.
Perfect, right, well done guys. Okay, so now we'll swap it over. Group 1, we'll give group feedback to group 2. Remember how nice they were to you?
Yeah, so I think everybody participated well. You all had your own jobs and you made sure they were done, and you all communicated with each other about what you were doing and what needed to be done to make the sandwich. That was good.
Yeah, so in terms of the communication, there was lots of really good communication at the start where everyone jumped in and had to go straight away, which was really good. And then I think in terms of just the communication specifically, that was better at the start than it was throughout. So perhaps something that you could work on would be maintaining the amount of communication you had at the start, so you don't end up with a situation that you had in the middle where some part of the group wasn't sure how many slices were needed and then the other half knew, but it wasn't exactly naturally communicated. You had to stop and reassess where you were at before you went on.
I think very similar to our group, you all like participated very equally. Everyone was doing something, everyone was participating. But if you had taken just maybe a moment next time in the beginning to plan out what you could do, then it might have gone just a little bit more smoothly. But everyone worked really hard and anticipated that.
I'd just like to say that that's the best team sandwich effort I've ever seen. I think it was the end result was your adaptation to the time pressure was presented very well in the end result. I felt hard people might have tried to cram all the ingredients in and it would have been a horrible monster of a sandwich, but it looked very nice, even though it wasn't technically a sandwich, I think. And there was no blaming each other. You guys all had a smile on your face when you came out of it. And I think most of the sandwiches were eaten, so that was a good thing too.
Well done. Okay. Team 2, if you could now address the person that you did individually. Okay. So you may need to move around quickly just to address. We'll go Team 2 to Team 1 first.
At the same time?
Yeah, so you're going to find your partner.
No, I'm Jess.
So we're just going to do Team 2 first.
So you do me first and then I'll go.
Yeah.
Hi.
Okay, cool. So, I kind of get very first part of it, but you don't know how well.
Are we supposed to have the same person?
No, you're just team 2 is going first.
So this is in regards to the sandwich making that you did earlier. Do you remember that? Lovely. How do you feel it went in terms of your role specifically?
I know it's just
I tried to listen to what other people were saying.
I feel like it went very well, and to be fair, the sound is all textbook. In regards to sort of how you did it, I was trying to have a few things. To be fair, it's going to make your head a bit bigger because I can't really find too much to thought interaction throughout. So, in terms of group discussions, I felt like you were very active and you were pretty much the leader without saying you were the leader. Like, you naturally fell into the role. As I've seen to do professional stuff, it's easy to just fall into the role of, well, why don't I do this? But you are very open to group participation. You're not like, it felt totalitarian. You're very much, shall we do this? It's very much, shall we, can we? It's not we are, because obviously that's just in terms of how to get people on side. I thought everyone naturally sort of found with that. Great positive reinforcement as well. I thought the fact that you were encouraging, saying, yeah, you got this, don't you worry, that's great. That's lovely, and that was very natural as well. There was no need for you to ever put any negative reinforcement, so I put that as a feedback. In terms of people who group in class, you were constantly delegating. I think it's not necessarily a bad thing either, because some people were less active in their verbal. So I feel like if you had waited for everyone to talk in terms of ideas and in terms of saying what to do, you may have been waiting a while. The only thing I would say is to possibly improve that, maybe try to prompt ideas from others, because obviously you're naturally a leader, you're naturally got ideas, you're naturally get into one's place, but those that are quieter maybe ask them prompting questions to maybe see if they get more involved.
Okay, right, let's switch it up. Group 1, you can find your individual from group 2 in feedback 2.
Can I give you some?
We'll meet in the middle.
Yes, I thoroughly agree. So, most impressive thing was that you guys really helped you, and that was really what you were doing.
It's also interesting giving such like serious feedback on this aspect.
Well, you did very much. You did say process forms, shall we use it or shall we not? So you did give the option.
My job is to actually just sort of feedback that's ridiculous.
Yeah, if we start wrapping that up then.
Formal, like it went for.
And when you're done, if you want to just realign your chairs, you don't have to move back, just realign your chairs.
Our role expectations aren't always clear. It's like.
Done with this.
Alright, how did everyone find that?
Good.
Quite daunting, I think, on both sides of the scale, isn't it? On receiving and giving the feedback. Because receiving it, you're obviously a bit worried about what they're going to say, and giving feedback, you're obviously worried about how they're going to react to it. So it's good to have experience being on both sides of that and knowing how to make it as smooth as possible. Alright, so I'm just going to go through a session review of what we've covered today. So, 10 tips on giving feedback. Okay, so we learned about how you need to time it, how you need to have a relationship, how you need to be positive. Them sort of things that really make it easier for the person to open up and to take on board what you're telling them. The importance of planning and being prepared. Okay, so I'm sure you can agree when you're given the tentative group feedback, it was good to have the notes laid out so you know what you're saying, because when you're on the spot it can be quite nerve-wracking, even if you are in a position of power. Then having that ready will help you to make it go as smooth as possible. And finally, how feedback can approach different people. So again, we didn't use that too much today, but in future reference, when you know your colleagues, your staff, you will be able to assess what kind of person they are and maybe give them the feedback that they prefer. Okay, does anyone have any questions?
No.
No? Well, thank you all for coming. I'll make sure I get all these slides to you so you'll have that as reference points. And I'll do the same again, I'll just hand out a feedback form for you guys to finish on this one. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank
Thank
you.
you. Thanks, Tammy.